hear Western Australia's coming up to the financial year end, 6 months behind the literal year end, mate.
Yes, we are. And like I know right now, like everybody's going gangbusters on spending and instant asset write-offs and all sorts of things because there's lots of free money.
Yes, but no money is ever free, according to those economists. It's just who pays and when.
Yeah.
So they did the budget here, which you may not have seen, and compared to the Victorian, West Australian, and Australian federal budget, it's very much a make sure you spend the money, but only on the things that are absolutely essential for wellness and well-being. So we're seeing things at the bottom end of the market being spent quite well. So if you're on a benefit, that will go up quite considerably. But the big end of town, which unfortunately would include you and me as consultants, no asset write-offs, no jiggery pokery. Your business needs to survive like it would need to survive on a downturn or an upswing or anywhere in between. So it's an interesting contrast, but the tightening of the labour market is happening in both economies. How do you run your business on a labour supply constraint?
Well, my short answer is do lean.
Well, if you were a generous soul, you would probably give people an end of financial year discount, or as I would call it, the shortest day of the year discount.
Shortest day of the year discount. It's a morning discount. I think I think that is actually an issue. And so what I'm actually currently seeing, and I have clients who've said this, is that they can't get people to come and work in their factories and in their business. And part of it, we hear about there's low unemployment figures. It's dropping. It's actually, I heard recently we have lower unemployment figures than we had before the pandemic. So, we certainly economically are going quite well. And it's because, the government's borrowed tons of money to do lots of infrastructure spend and give away free money to businesses for asset write-offs and things like that. But the other question is, why do we have a shortage of people when our unemployment rate being so low? Now, partly what I see, this is my thinking. I think there's too many good jobs to go around. I think people actually have a lot of choice. I think if I was someone with, say, hadn't done a lot of training or hadn't done any secondary school education, and I had a choice between earning minimum wage in a factory, getting dirty and doing dangerous things and doing physical work, or getting minimum wage in a cafe, or even, like I know here in Western Australia, a tourism business, because all the local tourism is booming. It's impossible to get accommodation if you want to go outside of like the Perth area.
Come over here, mate. One flight a day.
Yeah, well, New Zealand needs it more than we do. I give you the tip, and I wish everybody would go away from all the interesting places in WA because it's too crowded right now. But like, if I was going to earn minimum wage in tourism or earn minimum wage in a dirty, stinky factory, I'll take tourism or making coffees any day. Right? It's got similar levels of certainty. It's the casual work arrangements are the same. Why would you do it? And I think that's actually what people are saying, is that there's too many good jobs out there. There's too many. Our standard of living is so good that it's very hard for people to be motivated to go and do a worse job. Or take, for example, even like, let's take this a bit further. You go to mining and go to fly in, fly out work, and there's a big push in the big corporate mining houses to get more diversity in their workforce. But I think the fact is that even with the wages, which are not that great if you're entry level into the mining industry, I might add, for the trade off of time away, there's not the motivation there. Why not just? It's not all about the money. Why not just be happy with your work-life balance and your reasonable income back in the city, doing what you do?
So then you've got lean as a differentiator for some business owners. That if my factory work isn't dirty and isn't stressful and isn't putting me at risk of having my head chopped off in a scissor lift, but it's repeatable, standard work that's reproducible and allows me to go home with all my limbs intact to spend time with my loved ones. That sets aside your factory from the great mass of poorly run, 5% productive, and disaster after disaster. Don't you think?
It does, and I'd add to that as well. Not only a safe place to work with a reasonable wage, but working in a team that is sustainable in its thinking, long-term mindsets about company growth, about quality, being given time to think and creatively problem solve, seeing processes that are boring, and usually those are the ones that are repeatable, get automated, whilst the creative stuff is left for the humans, is always a very satisfying place to work as well. So the businesses I see where they do actually instill a lot of lean and continuous improvement and therefore operational capability in what they do, they have longer tenures. People are not motivated to go to work based on, top-notch wages or highest level wages. They're not motivated to quit and go and work for a competitor for an extra $50 a week, because they're engaged. Their leaders encourage continuous improvement, and their leaders value their input. When you talk about why people leave and why they don't choose to go to some of those dirty jobs, it's things like, firstly, it's money. Am I getting paid the right amount? Now in Australia, and it would be the same in New Zealand, we have a standard of living and we have a minimum wage that is actually pretty reasonable. Some people would disagree, but it is actually pretty reasonable. Do you get along with your peers or your boss? And is the work meaningful? Now, generally speaking, what I see either bosses who don't get it and treat people like they're just numbers, or groups, teams that don't get along, or the work isn't meaningful. So they end up paying a bit more for their labour to try and get it. And if they're not prepared to pay more, they struggle to keep people. But if they pay a bit more, they'll get some people who are a bit more loyal, but it's not a great place to work. The businesses where they pay a little bit more than normal, and they pay fairly, but I wouldn't say they're like the top payers, but they have great leadership, great teamwork, and meaningful work. Those are the ones that keep their employees long term, and employees don't go looking elsewhere. So when a business owner says to me, I'm struggling to find people, it's because you're actually struggling with a culture that doesn't value the individual and the teamwork that the individual contributes to. So I think that's really important, to be seen as an individual, but to know that you're part of the greater good.
No, I agree with you, mate. I gave another client a simple way of starting, as what you're talking about there. It does take a mindset change and it does take energy. There is something that you could do quite quickly for most businesses, which they don't appear willing or able to do. And that is, if you are looking for a new job, the shortest amount of time from when you express an interest to when you get a go, no go as an answer and start mobilised, ready to go in this new exciting job, you can make that as short as possible and make it clear that it's a consistent amount of time, so you've set the expectations. Now, if you apply to work in my factory, we'll know whether we have a good relationship in no more than 5 working days. And depending on your agreement with the current employer, you can start any time within 3 days afterwards, up to the time that you have to resign and tell your previous employer. That repeatability and reproducibility will attract people to you more than, I might hear back in 2 weeks' time, and then I have an assessment centre that's in the next 3 weeks, and then they'll send me to a medical and drug screening a week after that, and you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, and in the meantime, someone who has done that whole, oh no, let's get you on board quickly, and that kind of thing has probably snapped up the good candidate. I see that again and again as well. I think that short lead time through your value stream of employment is very important because it shows you're serious. The other thing is that you really, and you might know the numbers on this better, but you really don't truly know how a person is going to go until they actually get into the job. They might interview well, they might give good references, they might look good on paper, but it's when the rubber hits the road, when they're actually working, that you find out, like, do they work out? So you're really running on gut feel at that point. And I think there's some things you can do systematically to make some good decisions around who you try, but you need to get someone on board rapidly. And you need to, it's just, to me, it's actually a point of respect for people as well. If they're not going to work out, you need to establish that, in a pretty short amount of time. I've seen many examples where, they get someone in, and after a month, they're not feeling like that person's really gelling, and then probation period goes by, and everybody loses in that situation. The person isn't happy. You're not happy as a leader or an employer. The team's not happy because it doesn't fit, and it's just a terrible environment. And then everybody is in this rotten, like, vicious cycle of it not working until the person who was employed originally says, I've had enough of here, and I'm going to go on my own accord. And it hasn't been fair for anybody.
Well, although it will shock any human resources people who may hear this conversation, we did run an experiment once with one of the mining houses somewhere on the planet. We'll protect their dignity here. And at one end, they ran full assessment centres with lots of play and Lego building and various bits and bobs. In the middle, they had leaders using their judgment of who was good and who was not. And we had a few sites that just took the next person that met the brief on paper. And we measured the proportion who got exited due to performance issues, the proportion that stayed on, and the proportion who elected to move on under their own steam. And there wasn't a significant variation on any of them other than the cycle time to hire. So the more effort that the client put in selecting people just delayed how long it took for people to onboard. There wasn't any meaningful difference in the attraction and retention rates of any of those populations. Now, of course, that got buried good and deep in that business, because it wasn't in the interests of the recruiting arm to just have the next person who meets the brief turn up with no effort. But it was interesting that our judgment didn't actually make a material difference in the quality of candidate.
Yeah. Something I have actually seen previously that has made a difference. The onboarding, and this was in a terrible onboarding process that was full of waste and everything. So eventually, get a person in, and it could be up to 12 weeks, which is very typical of their industry, and terrible. And what we actually did I had a black belt working for me at the time, because I was managing a business improvement department, and he was a very smart guy, and he did the data analysis on what was happening in a particular department. But their turnover was about 3 months. Like, people were leaving after 3 months. So he analysed the data. He looked at what was going on. He was able to prove statistically that they were leaving at 3 months. And what he discovered, he then interviewed several people. He discovered that their onboarding experience determined whether or not they immediately started looking for a job. And 3 months was the amount of time it took them to find the next job. So within the first week, they started looking again. So
there's an old saying.
It was amazing.
It's an old saying, mate, that matches what you said. You remember your employer based on the first day and the last day, mate.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that was really interesting. And what I took out of that was that a really great first week did set that person up for success, regardless of whether the business was, underlying a lean business or well organized. If the culture was there to actually care about somebody who'd arrived, then you would surely keep them a lot longer than that 3 months. They were staying for a reasonable amount of time after that. If you didn't care, then there was no chance. And my own personal experience in that business was interesting because I came to that business and I came to my first day and I was very low level at that point. And I remember the manager going, "Who are you?" Right, okay. Okay, I know you were coming or anything. And then I was just sort of like chucked into the group. Now I lasted 6 months in that department. Unfortunately, that business was big and diverse enough, and I could see the underlying business. I really liked it. I took a transfer as soon as I possibly could to a different department where it had a different attitude and different people, and I didn't get that same welcome in my transfer. My transfer was much more engaged and involved, and I stayed in that department for 3 years, and actually took 2 promotions within that department as well. So it was a great environment, and that's why I stayed as long as I had. I think if I'd had the same treatment in my first week when I transferred, I probably would have left that business altogether, because I would have gone, "Oh no, this is really broken." But I kind of feeling that it was only certain parts of that business were broken.
And that repeatability and reproducibility and that critical to customer quality style thinking around recruitment, it's not there in a lot of industries. It's not there in a lot of locations. So differentiating yourself to the market by having a very predictable and welcoming onboarding, very predictable and welcoming offboarding. That wins the hearts and minds, or at least it differentiates you from the great unwashed that don't have that lean mindset.
Yeah, exactly. And if a business, particularly for a small business, if you don't have a formal process around your onboarding, create a checklist. What is who does this new person buddy up with? What's the first thing they do on the first day? Create a checklist of all the things that you want to take them through. Give them a buddy when they're into their work, but maybe have a buddy that's outside of their work too. Maybe it's from your HR department or your finance or some kind of coordinator role, who's like a point of contact for them that's outside of their team, and have that person be their initial welcome on board individual who goes through that checklist and makes sure that they're covered off on a whole range of things. And that just makes people feel wanted. That person certainly doesn't need to be doing productive work on day one. They just need to be made to feel comfortable where they are and make a start on their work. If they have that good first day, first week, where they've really been, brought in, I suppose, to the fold and brought into their teams and understand how the business works, that's a repeatable process. And it's as simple as a checklist.
And you added a bit of "and" on too, mate. The person in finance, as an example, is that red light that says that something might be going amiss before the person decides to go and find themselves another job somewhere else.
Yeah, different perspectives. But I think ultimately, with people craving human connection as well, unless someone has an actual real, underlying issue, that you've got to say, oh no, maybe they're not a good fit here, or maybe we've overestimated their capability. Most people actually just need to have a good connection with a few people in the business to feel comfortable, to feel safe and secure as part of your team, and they'll know how to adapt to the team environment, and they'll know what the team environment is like and what the culture's like.
So we covered a lot of territory, even though you might be 4 hours and 20 years behind us here in the future. All going well, the economy will stay buoyant, but like any economy, it's a cycle, and going from the top, there really is only one way, which is down.
Yes. So be lean, be efficient, have people only doing value-added activity, regardless of what it is always going to see you in a better stead around.
And of course, eliminating waste during the buoyant times is better than being compelled to remove the waste in some tough decisions on the downswing.
Yeah, culture of continuous improvement is a all weathers culture, and it's not just a fair weather thing, and it will see you through the leaner times or the downturns much more effectively. People will actually see it as an asset rather than here comes the toe cutting.
It's a culture of resilience, Len, rather than a culture of desperation.
Yeah, definitely. I think that resilience is something that it does build, and you see teams banding together and going, we're going to get through this and we're going to do it even better, and it's going to actually motivate us to think of better and smarter ways to make this business, take advantage of the next upswing, not just survive the downswing, but actually be prepared to take advantage of the upswing.
And perhaps in my 10,000-year lifespan, I've actually seen a business perform the best it's ever performed on the downswing. So profit margins increased, safety performance improved. They made more money dealing with the downswing, which nobbled all their competitors. And no one's ever considered a downturn as a competitive advantage up to that point in my career.
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think it can be. And I think it's important that there's that kind of mindset, because, whether it's pivoting or whether it's just a burning platform to really take some strong action, you can really turn it into an advantage.
And so I believe I know a few companies that offer a self-paced, computer-based Lean and Six Sigma course, mate.
Yeah, we might be able to do that kind of thing, but it's certainly something that I think everybody should be encouraged to do is learn and build a capability within their business to actually conduct continuous improvement, because we might be, booming on an economy that's full of borrowed government money right now, but our current challenge is labour shortage, because there's too many choice jobs out there. And in the longer term, I think that the party will be over and things will slow up. There won't be excessive demand for things like, say, iron ore, and that has a trickle-on effect to 30% of the economy. Is related to that, from the supplier to the big iron ore miner to the person who makes the coffee beans for the cafe where the people from the iron ore miner go and get their coffee in the morning. They all are affected and interconnected. So it doesn't really matter your industry. You're in some way connected to what's happening macroeconomically, and you need to be lean and efficient and have great teamwork going on to actually, deal with those ups and downs.
Agree, and it's the wise business leader who understands that the entire engine is based on something that you're not the price maker of, you're just the price taker.
Yep. It's all happening, whether or not you're involved.
Indeed. So I will allow you to go and keep your economy going, and I'll turn my thoughts into how we can pivot some of the New Zealand economy away from tourism into something that might be a bit more sustainable, mate.